Hello, I'm Pearl Jean Mabe, an AmeriCorps member serving at Heritage Ohio, and I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar. As a start to the new year, we are happy to be hosting this webinar for free to all who are interested. Monthly webinars are a membership benefit of Heritage Ohio. Individual memberships start at only $25. Heritage Ohio's mission is to help people to save the places that matter, build community, and live better. Today we'll have a presentation about historic building maintenance. We'll be taking questions at the end of the presentation. If you have a question, type it into the chat box. If you have problems with the webinar's software, most problems will be solved if you close the program and restart it with the link that was sent to you. We'll be sharing the PowerPoint and the video of today's webinar after the presentation. This webinar is pending approval for AIA HSW credits. Please email me at pmabe@heritageohio.org as indicated in the chat box at the end of the presentation if you would like to receive credit. And now I would like to introduce our presenter, Elizabeth Corbin Murphy, a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. Elizabeth Murphy is an architect and principal of Chambers, Murphy & Burge, dedicated solely to preservation and restoration technology and design. She holds a professional degree from the University of Notre Dame and a master's degree in architecture from Kent State University, where she is now a professor in practice. She is a past chair in architecture. She is a past chair of the advisory group for the American Institute of Architects National Committee on Historic Resources and currently serves as president of American Institute of Architects, Ohio.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all warm and safe and wearing fuzzy slippers. It's pretty miserable here. I have tried to consolidate everything there is to know about historic building maintenance into 1 hour and still leaving time for questions. So we will head through this presentation, and please, again, as Pearl told you, type any questions into your chat box. She will consolidate the questions and we will try to get them all answered. Okay, are we on air? It's not advancing.
Click on the screen.
Got it. Okay, we have in front of us the obligatory AIA verbiage for the beginning of any AIA sanctioned event, and basically it says that they're not responsible if I say something stupid. So let's hope I don't say anything stupid. We will move forward. This session will discuss the importance of cyclical maintenance planning, planning for and carrying out continuing care so that preservation projects can achieve long-term value for rehabilitated historic properties. How to preserve your investment. Again, my name is Elizabeth Murphy. I have practiced solely with historic preservation with my partner here, and we are celebrating 50 years in the last year. I'm not quite that old. Lauren and I have been with Chambers, Murphy & Burge since 1993. We do about half of our work with other architects and half of our work directly for clients. We took over from Henry and Lorraine Chambers, who wrote a book on cyclical maintenance planning for the National Park Service, was first published in 1973. While the process of publishing that book in 1973 differs greatly from how we publish things today, the concepts and precepts for historic maintenance planning have changed very little, frankly, over the last 100 or 200 years. So our learning objectives for today are to discover important planning tips for long-term historic preservation, to study ongoing processes for a successful historic building rehab project, to understand the financial benefits of historic building renovation projects, and to learn about best practices for ensuring the long-term value of the historic building renovation project that you might have just completed. This first slide is of the Edsel and Eleanor Ford House in Grosse Pointe Shores, Michigan. I actually am going to save discussion of this building for our case study portion, but I needed to start after all of those obligatory slides. I needed to start with one of my favorite photographs. This is a Balthazar Korab photograph, and it I think embodies the passion that we find when we practice with buildings such as this one. This is actually a before shot, but Balthazar Korab was really good. So his photos, as I said, embody passion. He passed away in the last couple of years and donated his entire collection to the Library of Congress for public access. And I think that was an incredibly magnanimous gesture, and hats off to Balthazar Korab. Stave off decay by daily care. Now, one of the most interesting pieces of this statement is to see that it was published in 1877. William Morris, on the Manifesto of the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, was promoting, indeed, cyclical maintenance planning. And so I would love to say that we invented that term, but I'm afraid that I just follow in very large footsteps. Now, before we start with the big long lists of the things you're supposed to remember, I thought that I would take a moment and show you a quick, just one quick case study, just to show you how important some very simple maintenance is. So I'm calling this case study the observation and routine. This building is the Mahoning County Courthouse in Youngstown, Ohio. We are working with MS consultants to restore the top 15 feet of this building, so to the bottom of the cornice. And this little case study is not actually about this building, but it's about water. Now, if you notice in the lower portion of this screen, we are standing on the roof of the Mahoning County Courthouse, looking down over the cornice to the adjacent historic structure. That roof, just after a rain, is full of water. There's about 5 inches there, maybe 6. When we were working on the roof of the courthouse, we noticed the water on the adjacent building, called the county administrator, and told him he needed to get that taken care of right away. So if you see these little bit of calculations here, if that roof is 40 feet by 100 feet and there were 5 inches of water, we have 12,000 gallons of water at 8 pounds for a net result of 103,000 pound load on that roof structure. That's a little bit of water. Now here it is, again, both the solution and the problem. There's a drain. And everybody said to me, but that's not the building we're working on, and I just could not let it go, so we made that phone call. And the head of maintenance came up, cleaned out the roof drain, took him maybe 5 or 6 minutes to do that, and we watched the water rush down that roof drain. It got rid of all 103,000 pounds of weight. So while I don't want to take credit for the problem, we're all happy to take credit for the solution. Let's see here. And here is the drain after all that water went through. And I show this for 2 reasons. One is because that's a very simple device, and that thing was in the way of 103,000 pounds. But also for the second reason. While that water rushed through the roof drain, it clogged the roof drain again. So we are back to the same situation, and we need to be aware, both by observing and by the routine of cleaning out the gutter, the drain, in order to prevent severe damage to the building. So this again is a simple simple solution, a simple problem, simple solution, but it's an excellent example of why and how maintenance is an issue. So a lot of times you'll hear the term deferred maintenance. In my mind, deferred maintenance is not maintenance. Why? Because there's generally $0 in the budget for deferred maintenance. It means we've pushed it off. We're thinking about it another time. It's not real. Deferred maintenance costs are elusive. No one's been able to pin down exactly what it means. Nobody has any idea who's responsible to pay attention to the maintenance, whose job is the routine, whose job is the observation, as in the previous example. We have intangible or maybe even invisible issues. And let me sidetrack to that for just a moment. That all that water on the roof was invisible to almost everybody. But it certainly wasn't an invisible problem when the roof leaks, the mortar washes out of the masonry parapet, the structure gives way below, any of those things. The issue of a clogged roof drain is sort of invisible. It's not romantic, it's not something fun to spend your money on, and these are just many of the reasons that maintenance is deferred. Abstract priorities. A lot of times people who put together budgets to take care of their buildings have a priority to them that is so much more important than the infrastructure or the building in which they are housed. They can't see the water on the roof. They don't know the foundation is leaking. They can't tell that their energy is going out the broken windows. And so it is very difficult to place importance on the maintenance, and it hence becomes deferred. Another thing that is often a problem with many of our clients is that they see their properties as non-income producing. If you have a commercial venture, where you have the potential to depreciate investment in the structure, then you start to think about numbers on both sides, debit and credit. Non-income producing properties are generally run by those who don't have a concept of how you handle a budget for building problems. So if we want to turn this from deferred maintenance into something positive, we begin to talk about a maintenance plan, something that's a positive thing, something that fits into your strategic plan. If you have an overall strategic plan, maintenance should be just another little piece of it. The key components for a maintenance plan include guidelines or specifications, some kind of very specific timetable, a staff and staffing plan, and a budget. If you have all of those things, it starts to tie the maintenance plan into the overall strategic plan, and it starts to key certain items with the responsibility for someone who is already on your staff. The maintenance plan likewise addresses very specific processes. Now these processes can be already in place, or perhaps you as the maintenance planner have to institute their commencement, you have to get them started, or maybe you just have to enhance or help the organization enhance their already existing issues. But very, very, very key: communication, design control, quality control, and cost control. The photograph on this slide is the Edsel and Eleanor, I'm sorry, we looked at the Edsel and Eleanor Ford house before. This is the Burton Westcott house, Burton and Orpha Westcott house, designed by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1908. This is a photograph taken shortly after its restoration. You can see the construction fence is still there. But this is a building that, again, had a not-for-profit owner, and it was first purchased by another not-for-profit owner who wanted to save it from demolition. It actually had 7 apartments in it when it was turned over to the foundation. So it was very, very important to get every one of those entities talking and to then figure out who would use the building and would it ever have an income? How did we meet design control that would meet the requirements of the Frank Lloyd Wright Building Conservancy as well as the Westcott House Foundation? And how did we maintain quality control throughout the planning process, throughout the construction process, and then into maintenance and beyond through operations? When we assemble a maintenance plan, we generally, first of all, we usually have 2 full documents. Let's say loose leaf binders, for lack of a better picture. The first one is the contents that you see here, and these are the contents that I will specifically address today. The other loose leaf binder is the dynamic portion of the plan where the person who's given total responsibility within each ownership organization begins to collect institutional memory. When he hires a painter to restore the paint finishes in the living room, then he keeps the receipts. When she decides to restore the fabrics in the sitting room, the receipts are kept, the date is kept, when and whom did they call for help, how much of it was done in-house, how much was done out. All of that belongs in the second loose leaf binder. Picture that, for institutional memory. So when the maintenance supervisor retires and the new one comes in, he can look up who did the work. It's also important because there may be split responsibilities. Depending on the size of the properties that you are caring for, the interior of the properties may be addressed by the curator and the exterior might be addressed by the maintenance facilities managers, and it might be that the shell of the building falls somewhere in between and we don't know exactly who the responsible party is. So those things need to be addressed. But from our perspective on the first book, the contents will include documentation, inventory of materials, defect survey or conditions assessment, treatment specifications, schedules, budgets, and then a process outline. Every one of these specific to the building. It's of no value if it is a generic document. What you see, the image that you see on the left is an image that was done before we did all of this on tablet PCs. It is a rectified photograph. Rectified, for those of you who don't know what that is, a rectified photograph is a perspective corrected photograph that is printed to scale. So we had these photographs done to 1/4" scale so that it would help us with our materials inventory. The codes that you see on there match the codes that are in our keys, open joints. For instance, OJs were open joints as opposed to orange juice. Just to give you a hint as to the thought process behind that document in particular. Okay, there we go. So our first item on our list was documentation. I'm calling this slide modified HSR format. Now, you will notice, if you are familiar with historic structures reports or HABS documents, Historic American Building Survey, that several of the things that we incorporate into our cyclical maintenance plan use tools such as pieces of an historic structures report or methods used for the Historic American Building Survey. And part of the reason we do that is not to make it more complicated, but actually to simplify it and to use a structure with which everyone is familiar. So when we use documentation, it will vary again depending on the project, but we use the tools that are listed here. Original drawings if they're available, photographic records, sketches, field notes, as-built drawings, or measured drawings. We usually hope to get away without having to do a whole complete set of measured drawings because there's really quite a bit of work and it runs the cost up for the owners, and we try to therefore do without them if we can. We use rectified photography or we use field photography, and we are now using TPAS. TPAS is the tablet PC annotation system. Vertical Access developed it. Vertical Access is the organization that rappelled off the Chrysler building to do an assessment for that building. And we use this system to document the conditions of historic structures. It allows us to take photographs and key them directly to an AutoCAD or PDF document or to a photograph, and also allows for us to quantify the defects that we may note. So I think in a couple more slides I have an example of a TPAS document. Now, this fishing picture has a purpose here. This fishing picture was taken in the driveway at the Burton and Orpha Westcott house that I showed you a couple slides ago, the Frank Lloyd Wright designed property. The gentleman on the left was the caretaker who lived above the garage, and we were fortunate enough to speak with his octogenarian daughter. She didn't remember everything, but she remembered a lot that would help us to locate, to find some good research on the building. There was not a lot of stored archived research on the Westcott house, so we had to do some scrambling. Anyway, the daughter remembered that she had some photographs of her dad, and she found this one, and this photograph allowed us to accurately replicate the gate on the driveway. So if you can see behind the two fishermen, and they do have a good load, behind the two fishermen is the gate out to the street, and we had no other evidence, no drawings, no other photographs, no remaining pieces of that gate, and we were able to accurately replicate the gate based on the fishing photo. If we're talking about materials inventory, this is a TPAS document. This document is, we use a background of an original drawing, a pretty old one that was, you can see that the windows are faded out. but this is the Metzenbaum U.S. courthouse in Cleveland. The codes that are on here are from the TPAS documents that we did, and they are directly on the original drawing, and the shaded areas will indicate something that has a specific problem, and you can see also that there are groupings of problems which allow us to find, in this case, a trend around the building, because for the Metzenbaum we were not doing a complete assessment, but we were giving them an opinion on where they might need more work and where they need to begin to address their maintenance issues. So if you're doing a materials inventory, materials inventory is really your budget planning. If you can quantify each major material, then you have a basis upon which to opine costs and a basis on which future planners may opine costs in comparison to your basis when you do your first plan. I just can't emphasize enough how important it is to have a basis of inventory, materials inventories. One of the things that allows us to lie to ourselves about the cost of maintenance is the scale of the project. So for instance, let's say we know we need to plan for 20% repointing of the mortar in 10 years. So if we can quantify the number of mortar joints, that allows us to be much more accurate. It is very easy for us to say, oh, on this building we're going to be able to repair mortar joints for $16 a foot. And so $16 a foot sounds cheap, so we'll throw $50,000 into the budget. And if you don't use that quantity, you're going to find out when you receive bids that you have way grossly underestimated just because the building's so big. So it's a real reality check to have the absolute accurate inventory of materials. You can do your inventory of materials by measuring the building. You can do them from rectified photographs. Remember I said rectified photographs are printed to scale. You can take the quantity takeoffs from existing or original drawings. You can do measured drawings if you really want to. But for an accurate estimate of time, money, and for operations and for the operation interruptions that you need to plan for, if you have a good materials inventory, it is really going to help you. Now, what do I mean by operations interruption? If we can go back to the first example, we show the head of maintenance on the roof cleaning out the drain. Let's say that whole operation took him 15 minutes. But let's say it takes him 15 minutes a week. So 15 minutes a week puts us at somewhere around 15 or 20 hours a year. And if you start to think about each one of these tasks, when you look at your staffing, it will help you to figure out how many people you actually need, how many items you might want to outsource, how many can you take care of in-house. And so being accurate is really, I can't emphasize it enough. Treatment specifications. When we're doing a good full cyclical maintenance plan, we include treatment specifications for the materials that we just talked about inventorying. Sometimes, depending on the scope of work of the project, we would do interior materials as well as exterior materials. Now, what I have shown here in this photograph are casement window hardware from the Burton and Orpha Westcott house. It turns out from our little bit of research that Wright actually held a patent together with the manufacturer on this device that is the hardware for that casement window. I seriously doubt that Wright spent his time designing that piece, but someone in his studio did, and we were able to find people to replicate the hardware and to repair the hardware that was existing. But there needs to be a philosophy that these things are important. So what we do with our treatment specifications is that we modify a CSI format. We have 5 parts for the specification instead of 3. And those 5 parts include a general description of the work. They include inspection instructions, materials and equipment, maintenance and cleaning treatments, and then repair and execution. Now, I'd like to spend just a couple minutes talking about a couple of these issues. The inspection instructions are probably the first and foremost important issue to encourage involvement by your facilities and housekeeping people, in that if you set up the inspections in a manner that the inspections can be done by in-house staff, then there is the buy-in right away. And it makes it elevates the importance of the inspector's job and the historic importance of the materials. It melds them together, and it helps to really implement a maintenance planning process. I can't stress that enough. We have written maintenance plans for historic properties who promptly set them on the shelf, and I guess they thought the book would get legs and take care of everything all by itself. But the fact of the matter is, you really need to encourage participation. Also, there needs to be a philosophy of importance, a philosophy for restoration. These pieces of hardware right here came from a Frank Lloyd Wright house. It was easy for everyone to understand that we need to take care of this hardware. It's uncommon. It's indicative of the detail that went into this house, and all of these things to go together. This is a curatorial decision, and the curators and the maintenance staff need to do these things together. Now, after those decisions are made, when you get down to repair and execution, there has to be a process by which the owner, inspector, responsible party decides that this is something we can do in-house, or this is something we must outsource. And there needs to be a line drawn in order to help you with your budgets, in order to help you with your staffing. But if it is something that requires a skill that is beyond the current maintenance staff, the current housekeeping staff, or the curatorial staff, it really is worth it to step off the site for that particular piece, knowing that there'll be other pieces that the in-house experts can handle. The defect surveys and conditions reports. This is one of my favorite pictures. This is Lorraine Chambers, my predecessor. She took her inspection jobs very seriously. She always wore her sneakers, and she always took a chair along with her binoculars, because she wasn't going to move until The inspection of the section right in front of her was completed. Then she'd pick up the chair and move. But she was in for the long haul, and she did a wonderful job, and she did a wonderful job teaching us as well. So in the defect survey and conditions report, we identify concerns. If this is the very first cyclical maintenance plan ever written for this property, they were very careful in the inspections, the initial defect survey, so that we have a good baseline, so that when the inspections are done in subsequent years by staff, they can compare it to the initial, and they can understand where the building has changed, where the defects are not changing at all and don't need to be addressed right away. But in these defect surveys, we need to make sure that we're locating the site and the building, what type of building materials are involved, what type of problems, is it an open joint, are there vines growing in the windows, are there missing tiles. So the type of problem needs to be identified, and then the 24-hour weather condition, because certainly a building that is outside of Detroit like this one has completely different conditions than would one be in New Orleans. So we also need to note the change or the urgency, and I know this may sound silly, but you need to sign your work. You need to date and sign your work. So if anyone needs to ask questions, they can come back to you and say, well, when you were out here last month, what did you see? Or I don't understand what you wrote. It's funny because I had trying to teach this to my students, I had trouble getting them to sign their field notes. I tried to explain to them, this is how you get credit for your work. Sign the field notes. Schedules. Now, schedules are difficult, and they're hard to get people to follow, but they are as essential as a materials inventory. We have to identify timelines, and I'm throwing a few words out here. We have things on an annual, semi-annual, and biennial basis, but then there's also the 5, 10, and 20-year routine. So maybe your roof inspection only needs to be done once every 5 or 10 years, and maybe you know that you're on a 20-year cycle rotating, replacing mortar joints, or maybe your schedules are based specifically on materials lifespan. You need to, when you're talking about schedules, account for emergencies. The boiler was supposed to last 50 years. It's 70 years old now. It's going to die any day. Make sure that that emergency is accommodated in your schedule. And make sure that you are prepared to prioritize remedial projects. If everybody knows that the kitchen at the Henry Ford house needs to be restored, but it never makes it onto the schedule, it just goes downhill from there. Now, I use that specific example because the kitchen at the Henry Ford house was beautifully designed. Henry and Clara Ford used the kitchen if they were serving 12 people or less. If they were serving more than that, then they had caterers come in. Then the house became used as a conference center, and the same kitchen that was Henry and Clara's for 12 people began to serve 150 people a day. So clearly there's some wear and tear on that kitchen. So that became an important remedial project for the Henry Ford house. And it did finally get a number. This is the second thing we have to do. First thing is to get the house open again. Second thing is to fix the kitchen. If the important remedial projects do not have an assignation for priority, they don't get done. Budgets. Okay, the budgets have to match the schedules. They need to use the materials inventory. You must always plan a contingency. You must always plan for inflation. And I think it's really important to make it real. So for instance, if you plan to do one item like replacing the sidewalk in front of the building, then all of your mobilization costs and your bidding costs will go into that just one item. But if you have 5 items, you only need your mobilization once. But if you put in your budgets just the cost of the sidewalk without all of the peripheral things attached to it, then your budget is not real. It's not realistic and work will not get done. There's 2 other things I want to point out here. One of them is to be wary of bids without specifications. Often you'll have a contractor come by who wants to help you with your historic property, and they'll say, oh, here, I wrote it up for you. I'll fix your chimneys for this cost. But if you have not had someone write specifications, or if the contractor is not privy to the care specifications that belong in your cyclical maintenance plan, then the contractor may not have considered all of the things that are important to you. And they may certainly not have considered your interruptions in operations. So you need to make your budgets real, and you need to actually have numbers in the budgets. The graphic that's there is a sample of a report of observed conditions. We used this process with Edsel and Eleanor Ford House. They have paid docents at the Edsel and Eleanor Ford House. They are very well trained, and they are very well invested in the house, and when they see something that's going on, they want to participate in the maintenance of the property. So we gave them a method by which they could do that. Anybody is allowed to fill out one of these reports and get it to the maintenance or the facilities department. The facilities department decides whether or not it's a curatorial issue or a facilities issue, and they respond to the individual who filled out the report by filling out the bottom part of the report. If it's something that's already been addressed and is in a budget for the next year, they are able to tell the docents or whoever filled out the form that their issue is under consideration and thank you very much. If it's something they've never seen before, they can say, we'll make sure that it's looked at in our inspections next month. So there is becomes a much better sense of communication. People who make the reports know that their reports are being read, and the facilities people know that they have other sets of eyes throughout the house, and it works very well. Okay, maintenance plan participants. Who is that? Well, who is everybody if you want it to work well? You have the consultant or architect, the physical facilities manager, curator, housekeeping staff, groundskeeper, administration, and whatever outside skilled trades that you bring in for specific projects. And this is a lot of people. So it's very, very important that you continue to have open communications, that there continues to be a chain of responsibility, and that everyone is respectful of everyone's chain or link in that chain. There are 3 photos here. One of them is an architect sitting on the peak of a brand new turncoat metal roof without a harness, by the way. And there is a gentleman on a ladder cleaning out the gutters, which is part of the cyclical maintenance plan. And then there is Mike Slater, who is the now retired director of facilities at the Edsel and Eleanor Ford House. He worked with the docents to make maintenance issues part of the tour. It was really wonderful. If he found a piece of stone that had been damaged or that fell off the house and he thought it was interesting, then he would set up an exhibit in the powerhouse so that tourists, visitors could see what it's like to take care of an historic property. It was wonderful. Okay. Now, the process outline, I'm going to try to hurry up here so I have time for your questions. This process outline, I think that it's really, really important to understand. Again, I have two things on here that we already talked about: intangible and visible issues and abstract priorities. It's really important that you work within any already established system with your client, or work to enhance the process with the client so that they understand how this maintenance plan can just fit right in with what they do on a routine basis so that things do not get ignored. In the photo that I'm showing you to the left is, I mean, that's moss. That's moss growing on a joint that was supposed to be mortar. It's actually an open mortar joint that now has an ineffective caulk joint and is now supporting biological growth. And mind you, this is in the cornice on the courthouse, and it is 65 feet in the air, so it is very easy to ignore. This photo tells you lots of things, one of which is that the last time this building was repaired, it was not done philosophically, technically, or historically correct, and has presented greater problems than if it were left alone. So all of those things are so important in the lines of communication. Okay. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. For so many years I thought that was a quote from my mother because she said it all the time, and then I found out it was really a quote from Alexander Pope. But the slide we just saw showed an awful lot of good intentions. So we have to have a reality check when we're doing our cyclical maintenance planning. That document must be easy enough for your client to follow and to implement, and technical enough so that things are done correctly, and just harsh enough to make sure that we are sticking to our preservation philosophies. And here I have several case studies. I think what I'll do is just go through one of them, and if there's questions, we'll take questions, and if there are no questions, then I'll keep going. So this is back to the Balthazar Carab photo. This is the Edsel and Eleanor Ford house. This is not the entry. This is what's called the apple court. This is the apple court down at the bottom. And what happened is when the house was first built, it sank a little as it settled, and the apple court actually sloped toward the house. So it sloped very, very small amount, and you probably wouldn't notice. And the apple court was stone set in sand with grass growing between the stones so that it allowed for drainage. And at some point, I'm sure it was after the family was no longer in there, when it became a museum, someone thought that it would be a better idea if we didn't have grass between the stones so that no one might risk tripping. So the joints were filled with mortar. So now all of the water runoff went straight to the house and caused biological growth on the inside and caused salts to form on the inside of the masonry building. You can't see this in this beautiful picture. So that's just one of the things. And you can see that there are some white spots on the roof. That is actually stone loss. These are limestone tiles from the Cotswold region in Great Britain. Since this time, the roof has been replaced with limestone tiles, and you can also see this beautiful red ivy growing up the chimneys. Well, this was one spot where we had great difficulty in communicating the problems, because this type of ivy grows right into the lime in the mortar and will actually destroy the mortar between the stones. So it's probably not a good idea if this ivy grows on the house. And in our discussions, we learned that the interpreters at the house felt it was originally intended to be covered with ivy, and they did not want to give this up. So we tried growing ivy on the sides of our garages on airline cable and lowering it down so we could take care of the side of the house, and we tried all sorts of things. And then one time, in order to make repairs, we were forced to clear cut an area of ivy in order to fix the stone. And we found out that within 30 days, the whole side of the building was covered again, but the ivy was much softer, much easier to remove from the stone. So we are now on a cycle of clear cutting the ivy as you go around the house and allowing it to grow back, so the ivy gets to stay on the house and we get to reduce and minimize the damage from the ivy. But I could go on and on with all sorts of issues on this particular house, but those are some of the things that we learned in our travels through Grosse Pointe Shores. Do we have questions? Okay, no questions yet. I'm going to keep going. If you have questions, please type them, and Pearl will make sure that I get them. In the meantime, I'm going to keep going. This, again, is the Mahoning County Courthouse in Youngstown. There is a picture down on the right-hand side that is a postcard. And I put that there because I did tell you that we encourage good documentation and good research. Now, there are an awful lot of really cool postcards from historic elements. I need to warn you that most of these postcards have been colorized like old black and white movies. And there is no evidence of research with any single postcard, so you have no way to know if those colors are correct. So please, when you use postcards for your research, do not accept the colors that you see on the postcards. On that postcard, you can see the statues at the top of the building. They are colored as though they are bronze statues. They are not bronze statues. They are sheet copper. And so that's just one example. So with this building, I'm going to move here. This has 3 not so hot photos that I won't leave up too long, but I want to show you that at the top photo there are clamps that go through, yes, through the parapet and through the stone that have cables on them. The team, the conservation team that was there, I don't know, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, was afraid that the parapet was shifting, so this was the way to fix it. I do not fault them for their efforts. I do not appreciate the methods. You can see in the lower left, oops, sorry about that. In the lower left, there are cables that are holding in the granite dentils. And for all of the effort of the cables, it seems to me perhaps we could have begun to repair the problems. And again, I don't fault efforts. I just don't agree with the methods for repair. This is the issues that we are dealing with right now. You can see the cracks through the terracotta. Oh, yeah. We have a question. Hang on for just a second while I look at it. Okay. Okay, someone is saying, when in England I was told they never remove their ivy. It's what holds the bricks together.
Actually, we just got a bunch of questions.
Okay, there's a bunch of questions, so I'm going to, first of all, I need to get rid of this ugly picture, see if I can find a better one, just so you can look at, oh, there, we'll leave this. Okay, we now have a bunch of questions, so I'm going to switch to answering those. Now, how do you respond to the ivy question? Well, ivy is one thing that we argue about all the time, and There are different types of vines, and I am not a landscape architect, nor am I a plant person that could grow much beyond the mints in my backyard. However, we do know that there are several types of vines that feed on the lime in the mortar joints. And we do know that some of the vines have the tendrils that stick to the face of the brick, and when they get old and they stick very hard, that if you pull the ivy off, you will pull off the face of the brick at the same time. So when we clear cut, we cut the ivy at the base, allow the vines to die before we even take them off so that we can reduce that problem, and then we allow them to grow back. If you like the ivy growing, I would do some homework and find some types of vines that are less destructive, and just be aware. Just inspect more often. That's an argument that I can hardly win. Okay, understandably, each building is unique in maintenance needs and budget, but is there a safe percentage that individuals can use to begin budgeting for maintenance? For example, dollars per square foot or percent of budget? Well, that would make things very easy, wouldn't it? I would say that if you were able to construct a budget once, then you may be able to simplify it by saying, okay, we see this much work is going to need to be done over 5 years. That averages out to a certain dollar per square foot, and so that's what we're going to budget. And I think that's okay. I also know that several of my clients and several other of our acquaintances, colleagues, are required to budget based on, now let's give you an example. One historic house museum that we work with has a budget that is equal to 6.5% of the average return on investment of their endowment over the last 5 years. So they have to take that budget and work backwards. Now, that might not hit everything that needs to be done. So what happens to them is if they don't hit everything that needs to be done, then they have to take the extra work, the undone work, and roll it into a capital campaign or into a capital ask or into a separate pot. So it's not ideal, but any of those systems will work as long as you are consistent and as long as you are realistic. Oh, we have another vines question. Okay, I'm just going to be point blank honest and say I can't grow anything on the side of a barn, and we're going to need to use the ivy. We're going to have to take the ivy's discussion to another level. There are some Park Service documents, see if I can remember where they are, the under cultural resources about ivy. There are a lot of discussions, and frankly I wouldn't mind having another discussion about ivy, and I think I would pull in my partner Lauren Burge, because she's even much more in tune with what grows well and what doesn't. I think it also depends on what area of the country you're in and what substrate you're growing things on. Who has the final say as to the damage assessment and repair method? Oh, well, I think that's, you know, those of us heady architects who always think we know what we're doing would love to say that it's us, but that's not the case. The case is that you have to work with your clients. You try to educate them and bring them along to what you think are the best methods, and then you need to allow them to make the decision, because it's their money, and they will have a decision that, I mean, it's not really any different than new construction in that sense, that you need to bring along your client so that they are well vested in the decision-making process from the very beginning, if you would like for them to listen to your recommendations. Concern with deferred maintenance on public buildings to the point of costly repairs in the future. This should not happen. It should be a crime to neglect public property. You are absolutely right. Absolutely right. And with public structures, it's even harder to figure out how to get to them, because generally the maintenance as we're discussing today isn't one that makes it to their budget at all. They're usually in a crisis mode. They take care of when it leaks. And now if you talk about the General Services Administration, they do have a good, the General Services Administration for the United States is the second largest owner of historic properties in the country, second only to the Department of Defense. And they do take good care of their buildings. Do I do laser measuring? Okay. We have done laser measuring. We actually did some laser measuring on that statue that I just told you about that was sheet copper. We do not own the equipment. We generally outsource it. And the reason we outsource it is not because of the laser equipment itself, but because the computers and servers that have to hold that mammoth amount of memory are beyond us. If we were doing it every single day, we might be able to justify having all that computer storage, but it's really, really, really huge point clouds with laser measuring. Now, if you asked me that question 10 years ago, I would not have said yes. I was not happy with what was going on with laser measuring. Things are much better, and laser point clouds are now interfacing with the software that we use in our office so that we can take the point clouds ourselves or the results of the point clouds and mix them in with our AutoCAD or Revit or Photoshop, and we can go from there. Now, I think that we are out of time, but I'll keep answering questions if people want. I can't do that, huh?
No, we're out of questions.
Oh, we're out of questions. Oh, well, okay. I did want to just show you this slide here of the Usonian homes. I know the roof leaks and the skylight leaks, but I'd rather live in this house than any other house in the world. Please notice that was a quote from 1946. The house was probably new when she made that statement. So we have done cyclical maintenance planning for Usonian homes and for several others. So I would like to thank you for this afternoon, and if you have any other questions, feel free to email, and thank you for joining us.
All right, I would like to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. Our next webinar will be on February 4th with Mayor Hall of Newark, and we will cover the mayor's role in revitalization. For our calendar of upcoming events, including our future webinars, please visit us at heritageohio.org. We will be sending out the video as well as the PowerPoint slides to those who registered today. So I just noticed that someone asked that, so we'll be taking care of that. Have a lovely day.